I didn't have a happy childhood, and honestly, I didn't feel very safe either. Objectively speaking, I had a roof over my head and both of my parents stayed together. But internally speaking, I would say it was this chronic feeling of agitation and apprehension, this almost haunting sensation of being on edge all of the time and never properly bonding with either of my parents. A fun fact, which isn't necessarily so fun, I never called my parents mom or dad. From the age of 3, I started calling them by their first name, or at least that's when my first memories were, but apparently I'd always just called them by their first names, which, looking back now and knowing what I know about infant attachment, isn't necessarily a good sign for happy families. As a child, I dissociated and distracted through television and Nintendo, and then when I became a teenager with internet access, I predictably stumbled into the dark corners of the internet, and that's exactly where I remained until I moved out at 18. My childhood isn't unique, and the reason I'm sharing some of my story is that you can probably relate to at least some aspects of this emotional abandonment cocktail of chronic wounding and potentially low-grade to moderate trauma. It's not about me and it's not about you, it's about the pattern as a whole. What do we do when our inner child feels unloved, unseen, and ultimately unsafe? Well, in today's video, we're going to be covering the topic of emotional abandonment, answering Luke's question. I'm going to bring forward 6 different books, but before I bring forwards any of the literature that I recommend you read, I need to make a very simple, very strong point. No one's coming to save you. Nobody. Not your next partner, not your closest friend, and probably not the parents who you still are seeking the love from. They're not going to come and save you. If your childhood is defined by abandonment, it's best to accept that they're not coming back. And you can't find a substitute in some other person in your adult life. It's a very, very difficult thing to accept, but if you can make this acceptance period, if you can metaphorically give up on your childhood, give up on the family that you never had and never will have, and don't cling to that idea as if it's going to magically fall from the sky, as you actually access the possibility of reparenting your inner child and giving yourself the motherly energy and the fatherly energy that you were sorely lacking. It's a really challenging way to start the video, but I honestly, from my personal story and working with clients one-to-one, when they get to this moment of, I'm never going to have it, I'm never going to have that childhood, I'm never going to have that happy family, I'm never going to have the mom I wanted, I'm never going to have the dad who saw me for who I was. When you can properly accept that, you can start to heal the inner child wounds, because that's the first stage. So if you're willing to move from that foundation, we can go into the inner child healing. I recommend that you start with 2 absolute masterful works around inner child healing. I think they're the best 2 books that exist. We've got Healing the Child Within by Charles Whitfield, with this confronting image on the cover, and Charles Whitfield with his supportive face on the back. This is an incredible book, and writing about the same time, we have John Bradshaw and Homecoming. These 2 books together are the staples that I want you to pause this video now and go and buy these if you haven't bought them and studied them already. I'm going to bring out a few extracts from Healing the Child Within, but I also want to indicate before I go into the rest of the books, it's not all love and light. We are also going to be talking about the dark side of the inner child, and although I don't recommend that you buy this book, not only because the cover is dreadful 1990s word processing clip art, sometimes you should judge a book by a cover, and I saw this and thought, ooh, this looks a bit dodgy, and in fact the writing is very poor. The idea of the dark side of the inner child is all you need for this video. It's not just the idealized childhood, that's what I'm trying to say. We are going to heal the child within, but I'm not going to make a very basic inner child healing video where we try and pretend that we could be this giggly, happy child who was full of potential and had this constant feeling of giggling and skipping. And if that's not what you had in your childhood, it's just an impossibility to try and re-access you, something that never existed. It's not restoring the safety that was taken away. What do we do for the person, the adult now, who never experienced that sense of safety, whose emotional abandonment started very early on, usually in pre-memory periods, maybe even in utero, they felt like they were emotionally abandoned. For whatever reason, you can't tell them to reaccess something that was never there, and it's often quite liberating for them to realize that the inner child is not an all-good character that gets perfectionistically pedestalized as the true self, because then they're going to be chasing in a overinflated, hypermanic way this feeling of pseudo-regression towards a state which never existed. You can't access the truly divine inner child without also realizing that the inner child does have a dark side, which we might touch on a little bit more in the video. That all being said, this very triggering, very challenging, very much different way, I think, of going about the inner child healing topic, I do hope that this video is useful for you. It's framing a conversation in a way which is practically oriented rather than hopefully naive and often quite well assuming, but it just doesn't work. I've worked with people one-to-one, and you can't heal the inner child wounds at the deepest level if you had a childhood which was particularly crappy and you don't really know what it feels like to experience positive love from mother and father over the many years. We have to start right from the foundation. So let's turn towards Charles Whitfield, and I think an opening extract from chapter 8, How Can We Heal Our Child Within? We've got 4 stages in the process. It's really a whole series, even a whole course I could make on healing the inner child. This is very much a sampler to guide your next steps, but for the sake of simplicity, I had to start somewhere, and I think that these 4 steps pretty much capture the whole inner child healing journey. So let's go into this from Charles Whitfield, a book that I highly recommend you buy. To rediscover our true or real self and heal our child within, we can begin a process. He actually italicized the word process, so key emphasis there on it taking many years, that involves the following 4 actions. Number 1, we discover and practice being our real self or child within. I do have issue with Charles Whitfield in this book because he collapses the inner child to be the true self in kind of a poetic way, but in terms of actual psychological constructs, your inner child isn't your true self. Not only can a child not be the true adult because the child is full of potential and you become your true self over the course of a lifetime, the true self is something which is created via process. Are you more of your true self at age 5 or age 55? It's obvious that it's neither of those ages, it's the whole lifespan. I don't like that language. I really appreciate what Charles is doing here, but I don't like the idea that the inner child and the true self or the real self are the same thing. They just aren't. Psychologically, they're just quite different things, but let's go with it for the sake of simplicity. I do need to bring down the pedestalization, because if you are a particularly traumatized individual and you're mourning the loss of the ideal childhood, if you start to have too many of these stories about the inner child being the larger-than-life true self that you need to struggle to reaccess, it's just going to make you quite neurotic. It won't give you the feelings that you're chasing, so bit of an attack on the idea. Let's get back into the steps. Number 1, anyway, we discover and practice being our child within, which may or may not be our real self. Number 2, we identify our ongoing physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual needs. Practice getting these needs met with safe and supportive people. I'll come back to them in a moment. Number 3, identify, re-experience, and grieve the pain of our ungrieved losses or traumas in the presence of safe and supporting people. Once more, that same phrase, safe and supporting people. We need other people. Come back to it. No, and finally, number 4, identify and work through our core issues described below. Let's go straight to another quote from the book, chapter 10, Identifying and Experiencing Our Feelings. Please buy the book for yourself. Expansion on points number 2 and number 3 about the unmet needs of the child, which is the core, I suppose, entry point into healing emotional abandonment. We have to identify the needs which were not met and understand the loss and the pain and then the potential fulfillment of those needs As an adult, they will never be quite the same. You can never go back to mother's breast, and even if you develop a certain fetish where you're really into motherly figures, you could be a man or a woman who's fixated on the motherly image, and maybe even you go down a certain role play where you end up back on the breast, it's not going to be the same thing. No matter how close you physically get or psychologically get, you will not be able to fulfill the need of not being breastfed. Some wounds do not heal all the way, just a bit of a pre-emphasizing, let's take down the pedestal, and that's actual good grief work. Good grief work is understanding that some things are lost forever. And if you understand that something's lost forever, you can actually start to move on. This is the same principle as dealing with the death of a loved one. We can't skip the steps. But Charles Whitfield does have something wonderful to say about needs. So let's read this quote and then I'll tie it all together, and then I've got 3 more books to share. People who grew up in troubled or dysfunctional families don't tend to get their needs met. Not getting our needs met hurts. We feel the painful feelings, since the parents and other members of such families tend themselves to be unable to listen to us, to support us, and to nurture, accept, and respect us. We often have no one with whom we can share our feelings. The emotional pain hurts so much that we defend ourselves against them by the various unhealthy ego defenses described earlier in the book. If you want to know what those ego defenses are, you can either get this book or check out the videos on this channel, because that's basically all of the mental illness and mental sickness that we see today in our society. It's a variety of ego defenses and defensive, reactive, responsive, cascading domino effects, often from very early childhood trauma. Sometimes it's not childhood, often it is childhood. The key principle is that you need to find your needs, and you need to have your needs met by supportive and safe other people. You can't go out into the dating world and expect to find mommy or daddy in their fullness. You may want to play with some of these ideas. You may have genuinely conscious above board interactions where occasionally, let's say me as a man, my inner little boy comes out and I need the inner mother of a romantic partner, or maybe if I were a woman, my inner little girl comes out and I need the inner daddy of my romantic partner. That's appropriate if it's made explicit. If you're getting locked into a shadow dynamic where you're unconsciously seeking something and you're playing out these patterns, which, let's say, I'm a grown man, and I'm this grown man who, let's say, has no money. I make no money, and I rely completely upon my pseudo-girlfriend mother figure to pay for everything for me, and have no intention of making my own money. And for some reason, she's okay with this because she wants to feel like she's in control and that she's powerful, and that I'm not really a threat to her, because, of course, a man who's not making his own money is probably not on his own path in terms of his career, in terms of where he's meant to be with his mission, and he's not going to get too strong to ever be threatening, and that doesn't trigger her certain runes around authority and masculinity, and he doesn't get triggered too much by needing to either become an authoritative masculine figure who's lovingly in control of his life and influencing the world around him. They both get to be in this shadow dysfunctional dynamic of his inner boy kind of getting his needs met by a safe and supportive figure, but realistically, if they just took a step back, they'd realize it's incredibly dysfunctional. Let's reverse the dynamic. Let's imagine a grown woman and a grown man. This time the woman is going into her inner little girl, and the inner little girl needs a lot of love. She needs a lot of cuddling. She needs a lot of support and attention and a lot of energy. Many men will feel protective and they'll want to provide that kind of emotional support to their partner. At what point does that need being met, that ability to be emotionally seen, become dysfunctional? I imagine it's when it's not also met with adult-to-adult consciousness. If we're playing with like inner father to inner little girl energy, what we need is the ability to explicitly see that this is a dynamic, and we can also step out and be adult-to-adult, or both be in the childlike energy. If you want to form a conscious relationship in the romantic inner child healing sense, you need to have the awareness to switch between different parts of yourself, and also realize that if you spend too much time locked in one dynamic or another, you're likely to get lopsided. There's a certain stage where it's completely appropriate to confess and admit your needs for extra support, to be a grown man, and I will say it, to be a grown man who's going through a tough time in a trauma-based healing experience, and turn to your partner and say, I need to be the little spoon tonight. Can you please just hold me? I'm scared. If you're with the right kind of woman, and that's something that you can appropriately bring forwards, and as I've mentioned in previous videos, you pre-communicate with them that you're doing some trauma work. It's not like out of the blue you suddenly break down and she's like, whoa, I don't know what to do with this. If you pre-communicate, I'm reading this book, I'm reading this Healing the Child Within book, and I think I'm going to re-access something that was really difficult in my childhood. I might be a little bit shaken up tonight. And then you come to the bedroom and she knows what you've been doing. It makes sense. That's a healing moment. You're getting your need met of having been a scared little boy. You're reading this book, you start to feel again like a scared little boy, and you go to your partner who's loving and supporting you in a bit more of that scared little boy energy. You don't know what to do, you're not the man that you normally are, you're not as in control and in influence, and I'm really playing in it as a scared little boy, and it's really scary, and it's like, She can meet those needs for you. If you pre-communicate in a conscious adult way, that's how you do it safely. Of course, there's the whole inverse relationship. You can pretty much switch out the gender dynamics. Same if the man was doing the supporting for the woman and her inner little girl. This is often what we do in relationships, whether we know it or not. We are healing the inner children of each other. But what do we do if we haven't got a romantic partner who's either available or willing to go into the space or even capable of holding this kind of level of emotional charge? Of course, we go to professional therapeutic support, and if that isn't available, it's a whole topic in itself. Find a therapist if you need a therapist. If that isn't available for one reason or another, either you haven't got the financial resources, you haven't got the time, you haven't found someone that you connect with, or you just want to be alone and you want to heal alone, which is completely valid, you need to learn how to reparent yourself. Shifting into the second half of this video now, I'm going to give you 3 books that are going to help you reparent yourself. Because the key principle of reparenting is that you need to be both parents to at least some degree. If you had dysfunctional mother and dysfunctional father, either together or apart, divorced, living, dead, whatever the situation might be, you still need to know what it feels like to access feminine love and masculine love. Before I go into these 3 books, actually, I'll bring up the 3 books at the very beginning, and then we'll wrap it all together. I've got 3 books on parenting. I don't have children. I've got 3 books that are mainly targeted towards mothers in their 30s and 40s, and I'm reading them because I want to know what it's like to be a good parent. Didn't necessarily experience too much of that good parenting myself. There's no blame towards my parents. They did the best that they could with the information they were given, but it wasn't something that allowed me to bond to them in a consistent way, and it just never happened, and that's completely fine. It is what it is. I've gone through that healing journey. But the way that I did that was learning how to reparent myself by listening to parents who knew how to relate to inner children, and then literally taking the language structures. Taking the language structure of, I'm not going to shame myself for screwing up as let's say in my early 20s, I'm not going to shame myself for not doing well on the test or not lifting very well at the gym. How would I treat my inner child who's within my adult body on the bench press, who has that shame-based response of, I'm never going to be anything? You respond like a healthy father, which is, come on, Junior, let's try again, or maybe not today, but definitely next week, that kind of like supportive go-getter energy. Or maybe I respond as my inner mother, and I say, don't worry, Junior. I don't know why I'm Junior. I'm Jordan. Don't worry, Jordan. It's okay. You don't need to do anything. I still love you no matter what. Mother energy, father energy. I learned the distinctions through reading these books, which are 2 of them, very geared towards mother energy and 1 towards father energy. We've got Raising Our Children, Raising Ourselves by Naomi Alder. This is a very conscious parenting method, which I think works very well up until about the age of 8 or 9. It's very much permissive. There's not too many boundaries and restrictions, but there definitely does need to be some boundaries and restrictions, which we'll get to. I have some issues, but also a hell of a lot of good mothering energy there. We've got a book like Balanced and Barefoot, which is very much what you expect it to be. It's about the liberating, healing, educational experience of allowing a child to go out there in the world and get messy and dirty and make mistakes and basically be a grounded, earthy little human, which I definitely didn't get enough of with my Nintendo, and internet addiction. And finally, we have The Soul of Discipline by Kim Payne. This is very much more of a healthy, grounded, masculine-inspired approach to getting a bit more of that structure in for a child's life, to teach them moral principles, to teach them values and ethics, but also allow them to be a child and to know how to phase that in as like early childhood, middle childhood, prepubescence, and adolescence. These 3 books together will allow you to get the reparenting energy, which at its very core, as I define it, is the self-love principle of self-respect and self-compassion. Self-respect being the masculine principle, where respect does have conditions. There's an inherent respect in being a human, but to actually respect yourself, there's a conditional element to it. I wouldn't respect myself, if I were being truly honest, if I didn't make a video for a month and instead decided to pick up the bottle and drink every night. That would be incredibly disrespectful. A healthy sense of shame would arise, because I know at my core, I'm meant to be doing something better with my life. My respect has diminished based on my actions. That's healthy masculine respect. But then we've also got the wonderfully supportive, far less conditional, some might even say unconditional love of the ideal mother, which is compassion, truly compassionate, healing feminine energy, blended with the conditional respect of the masculine. We get both together, and we've got this wonderful double-sided approach to our own healing journey. We reparent ourselves in the day by day as we go through the triggers, we realize the shame, we recontact the trauma, and depending on what's appropriate, we speak to ourselves as if we were the ideal father or the ideal mother. Again, that example of me being in the gym, I'm failing the rep, so imagine I get to here. It's like, oh no, and I gotta do that awkward thing where you pull it down off your waist and tip off the weights to the side. I don't get a shame-based response if that happens. I mean, it never happens anymore because, like, I never fail a set, right? But imagine if it were to happen, I don't get this massive shame-based inner child anchoring of I'm never going to be very good and I'm going to get punished by my parents for not being very good or anything like this, because I've so thoroughly reconditioned my subconscious to respond with love plus this element of, like, conditional striving. It's almost at a point where I've got like an internal mother and an internal father that are both linking arms or holding hands, and they both say a sentence or two at the same time. I simultaneously hear the inner idealized mother, which I didn't have. No one has the ideal mother or the ideal father. It's playing with archetypal energy. I heal the ideal mother. I hear the ideal mother, and she says, Jordan, don't worry about it. I love you no matter what. And the father says, not this time, son, but you're going to get it next time, or maybe even, this is a tricky one, maybe even a bit of a tease, which is a good father energy of, I don't know what it would be, something like, I don't tend to play into this energy too much. What would be like a fatherly tease of failing a bench press? I don't know, should have eaten more eggs this morning. I don't know, just a playful, awful tease. You can tell that I don't relate to myself too much in that energy when it comes to like bantering, but even just imagining like playing with the general bantery energy of don't take yourself so seriously and you're not as good as you think you are, and that's also okay. Even if the explicit, this is why it was tricky for me, if the explicit statement is you're being a bit of a fool, don't act like an idiot, hey, here's a condition, you didn't meet the condition, you're below the idiot threshold, it's said with a smile. It's like, don't be such a dummy, like, you're being a dummy right now. But then the energy is like, the inner father lifts the bar off you so you don't get hurt, and then sets you back up so you can go again. That healthy male bonding pattern of, you didn't do it this time, but we're going to lift you up and you're going to do it again. Oh, not again. Lift you up, maybe a bit of a tease this time, let's rile you up a little bit. Is that all you've got? That all you got? Come on, you're better than that. Come on, I raised a son who's better than that. Come on, let's go. Difference in the tone. I raised a son who's better than this. That's where we've got to be careful. I raised a son who's better than this. My son's better than this. I raised a son who's better than that. All of those are like, a bit too toxic, right? A bit too intense, but no son of mine's going to fail a bench press. Let's get back on it. It's a bit better, isn't it? It's a very different feeling. That's why we can't ignore this inner father principle, because if we're only going to go for the unconditional love of the mother, which is very much the early stages, like the toddlering stages, we need that unconditional motherly love, we won't allow for the conditional love of the healthy masculine to come through, and you're going to experience problems with the men in your life, because that's how most men relate to themselves and other people. There are conditions to be met, and if the conditions aren't met, our respect and our love and our engagement and our acceptance does shift. It's not right or wrong, it's just understanding the difference between the different types of love and the different types of parenting. It's why the classic family model of healthy mother and healthy father working together to give two angles of parenting on the same child. The father scolds without significant punishment, but says, you know what, you didn't do the homework, and we spoke about this, maybe like a 9-year-old boy. You didn't do the homework. Your teacher called me up this afternoon. We're not going to go to the theme park this weekend. I told you that this would happen. I'm sorry, but you know what's happened. And then the child goes through a tantrum. He then runs off to the mother, and the mother says, your father was correct in scolding you. You should have done your homework, but don't take him too seriously and dry those eyes and come here and have a hug. When the child's a bit older, age 15, that changes into a bit more of mature form. It's shifting. It's an ever-shifting process of reparenting, and if you want to truly go into the depths of what it means to heal the inner child, it's realizing that the inner child exists at all ages, from birth into adolescence, and if you can access the different compartments of childhood and apply the correct healing energy as emotionally calibrated to whatever is going on, which is such a long process, you're going to need books like these. Please pick them up. It's such a long process because there's no rule book, in the same way that being an actual parent has no rule book. You can't be given a to-do list because it's about emotional calibration. If you've given up the ideal family that you never had, and you're willing to put in the work to create the ideal inner family that you could experience, it's never going to be quite the same. But you can definitely have a lot of joy, and you can be a very wonderful person, not only for yourself, but for other people. The work that I do with clients is informed by how I speak to myself and my own inner child, and the same way with any close connection that I possibly form. I have this healthy mother, this healthy father who live inside of me, and I have a much wider range of reactions and possibilities in my communication because I know how to speak from different energetic centers. The inner child isn't the true self or the real self as a whole, in the same way that the inner mother, the inner father, the inner old man or old woman, or maybe archetypal contact with the king or queen, if you want to go into depth psychology, none of them are the true self. The true self is the inner child nested within the adult personality, which is always shifting, and as the front cover indicates, over time that child becomes a happy, smiling baby, and we become happy, abundant, hopefully adults who can connect with other people and the inner children in each other. It's a difficult video to make. You can see that I'm trying to bring up many different areas of the conversation. It all relates back to this idea of emotional abandonment, because the emotionally abandoned individual needs to realize that they can heal the abandonment issues, but it begins with their own abandonment of themselves. And that's something which is very difficult to catch for anyone outside of you as an individual, because it's about the way you talk to yourself. It's about the way you abandon your own dreams. It's about the way that you abandon the routine that was going to set you on the path towards health rather than the path towards destruction. It's realizing that every time you pick up the drink, every time you go to the cigarette, every time that you go back into yet another dreadful relationship and give someone access to your body who doesn't deserve it, you've emotionally abandoned yourself. And if you pause and reflect on why that feels okay, you'll notice that the thread loops all the way back to a moment in childhood where you weren't given a reason to be deserving, to feel like you were capable of asking for more. You weren't given enough, so you don't expect very much, and even when you say to yourself, I expect this dream, it could be a job, could be a relationship, could be a state of health. If you don't heal the abandonment wound, if you don't heal that emotional inner child scarring, you're likely to trip yourself up repeatedly for the next few decades. So you might as well do the work now. If this video hasn't been convincing enough, if you need another video or two to try and get you along the path and convince you to just read these books, or go somewhere else. I do have another video coming up on the screen right now, but I'm going to close off this video by saying, just watch how you talk to yourself. Really watch for it and start to change it. And here's the next video.